evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Time. Happy Monday. We've had a few days to reflect on it and have concluded that no honest person could believe that the raid on Donald Trump's home last week was a legitimate act of law enforcement. It was not. Even the Biden administration didn't really bother to pretend otherwise. The official explanations that we have heard for the raid make no sense at all. It doesn't matter how forcefully they are repeated by the media, they're nonsensical. In case you've forgotten what they are, here's the very first explanation they gave us.
Why did this guy have these ultra-classified documents in the basement of Mar-a-Lago, unsecured, where they could be presumably broken in on or stolen or photographed and given to hostile foreign powers or conceivably even terrorists?
Are you listening to this? So it's not just classified documents in the basement of Mar-a-Lago, but according to Michael Beschloss, the pet historian of the half-wits who run our country, these are ultra-classified documents, the most classified kind, just sitting there helpless in boxes like maidens in bikinis waiting to be photographed by terrorists. You just imagine Al-Qaeda taking selfies with these documents, one after the other relentlessly, repulsive and terrifying. Is it true? At this point, no one has provided proof that it is true, not that august historians like Michael Beschloss wait around for actual evidence before pronouncing final judgment on cable news shows. They just go ahead. But for the sake of argument on our show, we're going to say that it is in fact true and that Donald Trump did in fact have boxes of classified documents sitting in his cellar. Let's say that's true. What would it mean? Well, what it means depends in part on what the documents were. Did those documents contain meaningful information? Should they have been classified in the first place? Is there a good reason the rest of us should not have been allowed to see those documents? Now, you never hear those questions asked in public, but anyone who lives in Washington knows perfectly well they should be asked in public, a lot. Because in Washington, virtually anything can qualify as an official state secret, and often does. In 2011, to name one of many examples, the CIA finally declassified a trove of documents from the First World War. These documents dated back to 1917, almost 100 years before. One of these documents, the most ultra-secret of them, contained a recipe for disappearing ink. Now, why would federal bureaucrats spend an entire century hiding an outdated recipe for ink that you can buy legally in any magic store for your fifth grader? Good question. No one asked it. Instead, then CIA Director Leon Panetta issued a press release bragging about how he was giving the secret ink recipe to a grateful public. Quote, "These documents remained classified for nearly a century until recent advancements in technology made it possible to release them," Panetta wrote. "When historical information is no longer sensitive, we take seriously our responsibility to share it with the American people." Now, there's no hint whatsoever that Panetta was joking when he wrote that. "You're welcome, America. Here's your century-old ink recipe." Again, this was in 2011, so think it through. You had to wonder, what recent technological advancements was Leon Panetta talking about in the press release? And just how recent were they? Was Panetta actually saying that CIA spies were still communicating in World War I era disappearing ink as of, say, 2010? Or even as of 1950? Please. It was bizarre. Of course, it was another lie from the people in charge. Here's the truth. The documents have been classified for 100 years, not because disappearing ink was any sort of national security secret. They've been classified because the government's default position in every case is that you have no right to see anything ever. It is their information. It is not yours. Yours the citizen. Yours the taxpayer. Shut up and pay for it all. To this day, there are large amounts of classified information remaining from World War II. These are documents written 80 years ago by people whose grandchildren are now old. But you still can't see it. You don't have the clearances. Sorry. So when they tell you that Donald Trump had classified documents in his basement, those materials could be literally anything. But once again, for the sake of argument, we're going to stipulate that Trump did have possession of documents that were classified for some good reason. Documents that, for example, we legitimately would not want the Chinese government to see. If that is true, would it justify what happened? Would it justify sending a large team of federal agents to shut down the entire southern tip of Palm Beach to raid Mar-a-Lago on a weekday? No, it wouldn't. So one of the laws they're telling you that Trump broke doesn't even have criminal penalties attached to it because it's not serious enough. Federal paramilitaries don't show up at your house when you violate the Presidential Records Act. And in fact, as we later learned, the actual warrant for the raid, which was signed by an openly partisan judge who, because you couldn't make any of this up if you tried, once represented Jeffrey Epstein's side in the famous underage sex case, that judge allowed the FBI to seize virtually every piece of paper in Donald Trump's house, whether or not it had ever been classified. They took Roger Stone's clemency order, for example. That had been on the front page of the Washington Post, so it was therefore probably not a secret. Apparently, the feds even walked off with Donald Trump's passports, preventing him from leaving the country. So whatever else this raid was not about the Presidential Records Act. That explanation is absurd. It's almost as ridiculous as the claim that the White House knew nothing about the raid before it happened. Right. Please. If they're going to lie to us, they ought to try a little harder. So what was this raid about? Well, we're keeping track, so here's the second explanation they gave us.
Now with Donald Trump, suddenly, when we're talking about the possibility of nuclear weapons, classified documents of the highest classified status being stolen from the White House and taken to Mar-a-Lago.
Just a reminder of why the Justice Department might be a little bit concerned about nuclear secrets knocking around Mar-a-Lago.
2 words for you, my friend. 2 words. Nuclear secrets.
What? Nuclear secrets? Nuclear secrets are the highest classified status. Ultra secret nuclear secrets. Donald Trump stole those. Ladies and gentlemen, America is in danger tonight. That was their new explanation for the raid. Now, that revised storyline was leaked anonymously to an obedient press corps, which, as you just saw, repeated every word like it was verifiable fact. Yet, once again, no one even bothered to explain what these nuclear secrets might be. What's a nuclear secret exactly? And what did Trump plan to do with them? Did he plan to defect to Moscow? Give the launch codes to Vladimir Putin? Start his own rogue state in the Bahamas? Nobody said. But that didn't stop former CIA Director Michael Hayden from suggesting that Donald Trump should be executed, fried to death in the electric chair for committing these crimes, whatever these crimes were. We still don't know. There weren't a lot of facts floating around. There still aren't. But there was a reason for that. They couldn't tell you the whole story. They couldn't release all the documents because that would jeopardize American national security. So instead, you're just going to have to trust them. And of course, you're going to have to listen to their outrage. There was a lot of that. There was endless huffing on television about something called the rule of law, and how absolutely no one is above that. No one, not even a former president. We're informed of this by the same people who paid rioters to burn down our cities, the ones who eliminated bail, the ones who encouraged tens of millions of foreign nationals to ignore our federal immigration statutes and move to our country permanently at public expense as a reward for breaking our laws. But keep in mind, no one is above the law. That was definitely the word from Joe Scarborough, a man who was accused of committing murder while serving as a member of Congress, yet somehow moved seamlessly to the MSNBC lineup without being charged or even investigated. No one is above the law! Remember that. So there was an awful lot of posturing in the days after the raid, but none of it was very effective because, again, it didn't make sense. Even propaganda has to add up. 2 + 2 = 9 doesn't convince anybody. Nuclear secrets? If the Biden administration really believed that, if they really thought Donald Trump possessed documents that posed an imminent danger to American national security, then you have to wonder, why'd they wait a year and a half to do anything about it? Why did they wait till 90 days before a midterm election? An elections that polls suggest they will lose. It doesn't make... Oh, wait. Actually, it does make sense. In fact, the question answers itself. Despite superficial appearances, the raid on Mar-a-Lago was not an act of law enforcement. It was the opposite of that. It was an attack on the rule of law. It was a power grab. As Matt Booth put it recently in American Greatness, the raid on Trump's home, quote, was exactly what it looks like, a show of force against the opposition leader by the head of state and his personal bodyguards. If this happened in any other country, it would immediately be denounced as the act of a dictator, end quote. That's true, but it's hard to hear those words anyway. As an American, you don't want to believe it, and yet here are the essential facts. The same week the Biden White House announced that Joe Biden will definitely seek a second term as president, the same week, the Biden Justice Department launched an armed raid against Biden's main rival in that same presidential election. That's what happened. Pause for a minute. If the New York Times told you that something like that was going on in Chad or the Gambia, what would your reaction be? You'd probably say to yourself, thank God I don't live in a place like that, a country where politicians used armed men to cling to power. Oh, but you do live in a country like that. You do. The evidence is all around us. We just don't want to see it. A week to the day after Joe Biden was inaugurated, the FBI arrested a 31-year-old man from Vermont called Douglas Mackey. According to the subsequent DOJ press release, Mackey had committed an extremely serious crime. Like Vladimir Putin, he had conspired to subvert the 2016 presidential election. In a tweet, Mackey had suggested, but not explicitly said, but suggested, that it was possible to vote for Hillary Clinton by text message. This act, proclaimed acting U.S. Attorney Seth Ducharme, was a grave felony, a felony punishable by 10 years in prison. Mackey's tweet, Ducharme said, amounted to, quote, misinformation to defraud citizens of their right to vote. Assistant FBI Director William Sweeney confirmed that Douglas Mackey had in fact committed, quote, vote theft. So, as befitting a criminal of his magnitude, Mackey was handcuffed and hauled before a federal judge in Florida called Bruce Reinhart. As it turns out, the same magistrate who authorized last week's raid on Mar-a-Lago. Weird. Then Mackey was hauled off to jail. Now, Mackey's arrest seemed like a significant story, but at the time, media coverage was relatively scant and almost uniformly credulous. The reporters who covered it simply clipped quotes from the DOJ press release and moved on to something else. Why? Well, the New York Times set the tone early by describing Mackey as, quote, a far-right Twitter troll. Far-right Twitter troll is not a technical term. In fact, it has no agreed-upon meaning of any kind. It is slang, and slang is something that serious newspapers never include in news stories. But in this case, the term far-right Twitter troll had a use. It sent an unmistakable message to the country, and in particular to the rest of the media. And it was this: Douglas Mackey is a dangerous person with unspeakably ugly views. He deserves to be locked up. And so he was. There was no consideration of the merits of the government's case against Douglas Mackey, but there should have been, because the case was absurd. If Mackey's tweets were so threatening to our system of government, to our democracy, then why did the Department of Justice wait more than 4 years until the week Donald Trump left office to charge him? And if Mackey actually stole the votes of American citizens, as the FBI repeatedly alleged that he did, whose votes were stolen? Who exactly were the victims of Douglas Mackey's crimes? The media never asked. The Biden administration never said. As of tonight, the Justice Department has never identified a single person who was prevented from voting or from doing anything else by what Douglas Mackey tweeted. Because there weren't any people. Those people didn't exist. Douglas Mackey was not a criminal mastermind running a conspiracy to commit voter fraud. Douglas Mackey was an internet prankster. His job was to think up funny memes on his laptop in his bedroom. That's what he did.